welcome to this bonus episode of Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over episode 1 of Mirai Nikki. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So we open up on a scene of what seems like a murder or a suicide or something. Clearly not good. It becomes pretty clear early on that this girl, for whatever reason, is deranged. And given the content that's already going on, it seems like she has pretty good reason for that. Alright. So I have to say, I absolutely love Mirai Nikki. It's totally absurd and tasteless and gaudy, and basically it's everything I love in anime and everything condensed into one thing. All the gritty violence and everything. It's just... it's not good, but it's still a masterpiece, if that makes any sense. It's so bad it's appealing. So here we have Yuki Amano, the main character, I suppose, and he's kind of an absolute tool. He doesn't really do anything with his life except document everything he does in a diary on his cell phone. Of course, it's not like he really does anything noteworthy anyways, but, you know, I guess it's important to have a hobby. So, you know, like, it seems like Yuki has sort of deliberately cultivated this lifestyle of not participating in sports or clubs or anything like that. Like, he's just really the type of person who does nothing. He's also kind of, a bit of a nutcase considering that he has imaginary friends at his age. So Yuki decides that he'll just, you know, spend his time talking to what is, in essence, God, as he goes about manipulating space and time, tweaking things subtly. So I guess as a point of interest, Yuki kind of wants his journal to be objective rather than about him. Which I guess is a bit of an interesting wrinkle, considering this whole thing's sort of weird to begin with anyways. So interestingly, his imaginary friend offers him the hypothetical, what would you do if you could see into the future? And Yuki just sort of shrugs it off, but, considering he had a text message on his phone from Deus, it seems like there might actually be something to this, rather than Yuki just being a couple cards short of a full deck. So to kick off all the insane violence, a woman gets brutally slashed in an alleyway. Good stuff, So, Yuki is now reading entries in his journal that are happening in the future. And it's the same sort of style that he would normally write his journal in. So, naturally, he concludes that he probably sleep texted these, but considering the metadata has them pegged for the current day, and considering that they are predicting events as they actually occur, it seems like Yuki has actually stumbled upon a window into the future. Indeed, it's becoming increasingly clear to Yuki as the next entry in his diary has become true, I guess. And it wasn't something as easily falsifiable as throwing a double bullseye. So things are only getting stranger and stranger. For now, at least, his diary kind of sticks to mundane things like answers on a surprise test in math class. I think if nothing else, this first episode really sets up some nice intrigue that the rest of the series doesn't necessarily capitalize on, but makes for an interesting first episode if nothing else. So Yuki has essentially accurately predicted the entire day, and I guess his first instinct is to bring it to Deus and confront him about what the hell's going on. And interestingly, Deus makes a good point about how imagination and reality are not necessarily mutually exclusive territories for a god to inhabit. Of course, Deus also drops the hammer on Yuki. Since his phone predicts the future, if anything happens to it, then Yuki's future also ceases. Which is to say, his life is now tied to the phone. Now, I think there's something interesting here about, I guess if you could predict every little aspect of every day you were going to live, that things would become interminably boring. But, that's not really something the show gets into. So at this stage in the game, Yuki is still under the delusion that this is in some way a boon. He can use it to essentially skate through life. And I guess that's true. If I were in his place, I'd probably think the same thing. But at the same time, there are other nefarious actors in the background. There's a murderer, it seems like one of the detectives isn't acting quite on the level. So I think the most interesting thing here is that despite working on a test, Yuki's got his phone out in pretty plain view of everyone. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I know the schools and colleges I have attended have been pretty strict about that sort of thing. Granted, Yuki's phone doesn't appear like it has internet capabilities, but it's no excuse necessarily. So now we're sort of introduced to Yuno Gasai. She's the girl from that first scene. But it seems like whatever trauma she had undergone was, unrelated, I suppose. More importantly, Yuno appears to have made a little sculpture of that little gremlin creature that was accompanying Deus. But even more importantly, Yuki seems fated to die. Of course, Yuno intervenes before too long, and it almost seems like she's here to kill him, to sort of enact the events his journal predicts. So notably, we learn a little something here in that the entries on his journal can change in real time depending on how he acts. Unfortunately for him, the prediction is still that he will die. It just sort of changes the method and location of his death. So I guess fortunately for Yuki, Yuno seems to at least be not dead set on killing him right now. Although she is following him rather relentlessly. So interestingly, Yuki makes a sort of leap in logic here when Yuno has her phone out. He sort of intuits that she has a similar sort of ability to him. So Yuno sort of like distracts him with the kiss, and then is distracted by the murder who's been going around slashing up women in alleys. So Yuno's diary, interestingly enough, keeps track of Yuki and what he's up to. So in a sense, it's even better at predicting his future than his own diary is. And seeing as how Yuno seemingly has a vested interest in protecting Yuki, it means that she's in an optimal position to prevent him from getting murdered by the serial killer. Of course, Yuki isn't exactly sanguine about this whole thing. You know, murderers, creepy stalkerish girls who have diaries devoted to him and his goings-on. You know, I think I can honestly say I wouldn't be faring much better than him in this situation. So, Yuki, Yuno, and the serial killer are sort of engaged in a bit of a cat and mouse game here. Essentially, they need to disrupt things enough to prevent Yuki from dying. Yuno seems to know a little bit more than she's letting on, even considering her diary, in that she sort of like steered them to an ideal place to confront the killer, and she's indicating that perhaps Yuki's skill with throwing darts could intervene on his behalf in some way. I think it's a nifty little bit of foreshadowing, too, that Yuno's seeming knowledge of the future is, I guess, explained by the fact that she too has a diary. So the two of them sort of cook up a little plan here to kill the serial killer before he can kill either or both of them. So Yuno's sort of banking off the idea that if they can damage the killer's phone, he will die. And interestingly enough, their plans worked pretty well. Yuno jumped out to distract the serial killer while Yuki threw a dart and immediately pierced his phone. Unfortunately for the serial killer, this has rather horrifying effects on his body. Interestingly enough, Yuno doesn't seem very fazed, and is actually kind of disappointed by the lack of viscera. Of course, just like that, she decides, now's a good time to get a bite to eat since Yuki's mom's out of town. So now Yuki is confronting Deus about this whole thing, and Deus is giving him that whole, well, I didn't say nobody else could see the future. And Deus also sort of hints that this is, in essence, a death game. A whole host of people have been given diaries, and they're all supposed to fight to the death. Interestingly enough, everybody is sort of giving Yuki kudos for having killed a serial killer who, by all accounts, should have been, pretty decent at hunting down other people and killing them. So interestingly enough, Deus informs them that their diaries can see up to 90 days in the future. Of course, given that the future is already shown to be able to change, I don't think looking 90 days in the future would be that useful. But it's an interesting plot point that I don't think really comes up ever again. So Yuki sort of brings up the fact that the future is changing and mutable. I guess Deus makes the sensible answer in that, you are not the sole determinant of how your future plays out. Hence why this is a game of survival. It seems like for a god to set up something like this seems like a real kind of sick and twisted thing to do. But I suppose, if I were an almighty divine being, I wouldn't necessarily care. So Deus sort of congratulates Yuki on his cunning in avoiding what would have been a death set in stone, but Yuki understandably despairs that, the cunning didn't come from him. So lastly, Deus sort of remarks that whoever wins this death game will succeed him as a god. So, I guess in a sense, the stakes are about as high as they could possibly get. For either death or godhood await. So everybody sort of remarks on how fun it's going to be to hunt down someone so apparently skillful. And this really only serves to unnerve Yuki because he knows there is no skill backing him up. At least, not any skills of his own. So here we have that iconic image of Yuno declaring that she will do anything to protect Yuki. Alright, so here at the end of the episode, we have a little bit where Murmur sort of, interacts with the serial killer. Now, the idea is, I guess it's sort of like a humorous vignette wherein the serial killer goes to kill Murmur, slashes the phone, and thereby kills himself. Interestingly enough, Murmur seems to be fairly divine in her own right and is able to bring the killer back. So it seems like she's almost sort of weighing the scales by informing various contestants of the death game before it unfolds. Because Yuki wasn't truly apprised of the situation until things had already hit the fan. Of course, given the difficulty from before, Murmur doesn't really care that the third died anyways. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.